In this week's parsha, the Torah tells us, Usvartem lachem mimachorat Shabbat, that you have to count for yourselves from the day after the first day of Pesach. You have to count up to 50 days, 49 days in total, and then bring a special offering to Hashem. This is the period known as Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. The Omer was a sacrifice brought on the second day of Pesach. It was a sacrifice of barley, and from then the Jewish people would count, and we continue to do so till this very day. We count one day at a time until we reach Shavuot, the festival on which the Torah was given. And indeed, the Sefer HaChinuch tells us what is the point behind the count. The reason why we count is almost like children who have a birthday that's coming up, and they count down each and every day because they really look forward to getting their birthday presents. Well, our entire reason for being is the Torah. That's the constitution of the Jewish people. And then we count down until we eventually receive or re-receive the Torah every year on Shavuot. And therefore, the period of Sfirat HaOmer between Pesach and Shavuot should be a joyous time. Unfortunately, it's not a joyous time. The reason why it's not a joyous time, tells us the Talmud, is because it was during these days that a great tragedy befell the Jewish people in the days of the Mishnah, shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest sage of his time, and he had 12,000 pairs of students who studied with one another, 24,000 students, and they all died from a plague in this period between Pesach and Shavuot. There are some historians who say it wasn't so much a plague, but that they were soldiers who were fighting against the Romans in the uprising of Bar Kokhba. But whatever the case, they died during this time. This was an unmitigated tragedy. It wasn't just a tragedy of the loss of life, which would have been terrible by itself, but it was a tragedy that there were no Torah scholars left in the entire country. Everyone was gone. What was going to happen to the Torah? And you can imagine that Rabbi Akiva must have been a broken man. He only started learning at the age of 40. He only came out of yeshiva when he was in his 60s. And now he had built up this incredible following. He was already a senior person. They were all gone. What was he going to do? And I suppose if something like that had happened to any of us, we would have gone into a sense of mourning. We would have moped about, depressed. But that's not what happened. We look at the continuation in the Talmud, and the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva picked himself up. He went to the south of Israel, and there he found 5 Talmidim, 5 students, amongst whom was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous author of the Zohar, and Rabbi Meir, whose name is mentioned throughout the Mishnayot, all over the place. He taught these 5 students, and they taught students, and they taught students, and the entire Torah was resuscitated. That is the incredible story of Rabbi Akiva. And so it is that we mourn during this time of the Sfirat HaOmer, and we mourn the loss of these students. But you know what? Rabbi Akiva never had any time to mourn. It was not unlike the story that we read in Parashat Shmini, where on the day that the tabernacle was inaugurated, an incredible day in the history of the Jewish people, there was a tragedy. The 2 eldest sons of Aaron were killed. They died in the sanctuary for bringing an unauthorized sacrifice. And there we see the words of Moshe to his brother Aaron. He says, you know what? You have to stay here in the sanctuary. You, the Kohanim, have to remain here. You can't go. You can't mourn your family that have just died. Who's going to mourn them? B'chol Beit Yisrael yivchu et hasreifa. All of the Jewish people, they will mourn for the death of these people. We can't mourn now, said Moshe to Aaron. We have to concentrate on the morale of the Jewish people. We can't let that go now. We've got to build it up. Who's going to mourn for your children? Everybody else will mourn. And this is the message that Rabbi Akiva took home. There is mourning to be done, but I don't have time to mourn. I've got to build now. That's the most important thing. And we see that this happened also with the Holocaust. There were many great leaders who either went through the Holocaust and survived the Holocaust. The founders of the Telz Yeshiva, Rabbi Elia Meir Bloch and Rav Motel Katz, lost their entire families in the Holocaust. They never sat down and mourned. They didn't even sit shiva. They rebuilt the yeshiva. The Klausenberger Rebbe, the famous Hasidic leader who lost his wife and I think 11 children, and immediately after the Holocaust started to rebuild and lift everybody's spirits, and eventually built the Lanyada Hospital in Netanya so that he could look after other people. There was no time for them to mope about. So out of the tragedy, the building grew. And I think this is an important lesson to all of us for all time as Jewish people. There's a time to mourn, there's a time to mope, but there's also a time to build. And if we sit down and we're depressed and we don't get up, we're not going to build the rest of the Jewish world. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.